Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of the Wild and the Wise podcast with me, Natasha Durand-Moulton. So, I want to open up with just a moment of honesty here, real quick. One of the things that I have been trying to do is really define myself in my writing and in my new podcast here. And I've tried on a lot of different hats, and to be honest with you, none of them really ever fit. And the reason why is because I, at my core, am a teacher. I guess I've always loved teaching as much as I may have wanted to deny it when I was younger. But even when we were small, one of my favorite games was playing school with my sister and teaching my sister things. And I always felt this kind of wonderful sense of accomplishment, even when she would walk away, kind of having these big aha moments or having finally put things together. And I've noticed that by and large, I feel the same way in my classroom. I love the moments where I see the kind of the thoughts connect for my students, and so I have decided that this podcast is going to be a little maybe less of that informal podcast, like friendly podcaster vibe, right, and more like what I want to call the wild and the wise classroom. And so I want to welcome you to class. All right. I want to welcome you to class. And so I want you to take a seat. My class rules are really kind of laid back and easy. You can grab a drink, grab a snack, grab a notebook, get ready to take some notes. And let's get into it. All right. So for the past several weeks, I've been talking about language, and a lot of the conversations that we've had centered around words. And to be honest, that's for good reason, because words matter. Our ability to use those words in a meaningful way also matters, and expanding our vocabulary also matters. And why is that? Well, that's because they help us name what we feel. It helps us identify what we need, and it communicates what we value. And so earlier in the series, back before I actually started the podcast, I introduced the idea that language has at least three dialects. So there's obviously um, the verbal dialect, verbal language. Those are the words that we use. There's also visual language, and for a lot of us, that is mainly like things like art. How we're expressing ourselves through visual, um, through the visual uh, language, for lack of a better word. Um, so we have visual language where we get art, and where we get even maybe body language where we express ourselves in a way that people can see. And then finally, we have that somatic or physical language, and that's where we express ourselves through an action, and through that moment. And so this has been a useful framework for language, and I still think that it holds. But this week I want to revisit it, because I think that there is one more layer here that deserves our attention, and maybe it's a subsection of visual or the somatic language portion. But either way, I want to talk about it here, because one of the things that I've been thinking about is how often we're told that we need to talk it out. So we're often asked, "Oh, tell me how you feel. Say it out loud. Process it. Write about it. Or in worst case, can explain it better." And while all of that can be helpful, I also think there comes a point where people get tired of talking. We get talked out, and I've experienced that personally. After the death of my late husband, after a while, I was actually probably more tired of talking about how I was feeling and how I was doing and how things were going, more than I was tired over the loss. And so I think we get tired of revisiting the same wound, explaining the same pain, circling the same story. And especially when all of that talking doesn't necessarily change anything. And I think this is one of the reasons a lot of people get exhausted with therapy after a while. It's not always because therapy is bad or it's unhelpful. Sometimes it's because talking is just it's overused, it's overdone. We're over it. And the body is as and our nervous system is asking us for something else. And that is what I really want to focus on today, because this is my last discussion centered specifically on language. We'll be shifting next week into awareness, that second part of the approach here: language, awareness, action. So we're going to start shifting into awareness. And so I want this conversation to kind of help bridge between, right, language into awareness. And so how do we know when talking is no longer the right tool? At what point do we need to stop trying to explain ourselves and start asking a different question? And that question is what does my nervous system need right now in order to actually let something move? We're still talking language, the language of expression, and how language can start moving into awareness. And the thing is I know this feeling very personally, because there are times where I have tried, and I want you to comment in the comment section if this has been you, but you have tried your hardest to say, this is what I need, this is how I'm feeling, I need to be heard, I need to be validated, and nothing that you say seems to get through, nothing that you say seems to matter. All right, and then all of a sudden you're all sorts of wound up. You're wound up by the situation, by the people, the stress, the frustration. And then you're just like, oh, okay. I need to detach from this, whatever this is. I need to detach from this environment around me for a bit. And I know for me, one of the ways that often looks, that I often engage in is sometimes I just get in the car, roll down the windows, feel the air rush in, hear the air rush in, and then I turn my music up loud. If I'm particularly angry, it might come out as something like, this is my millennial coming out, but it comes out as My Chemical Romance or Linkin Park or Korn or something along those lines, okay? So you just see this 40-something-year-old white woman driving down the road with angry music spilling out of the car. And she's just in the moment and yelling the lyrics. And, the thing about it is what's interesting about that moment is that it's not even really for me about talking anymore. I don't have to explain myself anymore. And it's not even about the words in the song. Those do help, okay? But it's about the sound. It's about the reverberation of Chester Bennington or Gerard Way's voice. And it's the rush of the wind through the windows. It's the feeling of my own voice in my chest and the strange sort of like bubble that it creates around me. And everything else is still going on outside of that moment. But in that space, my nervous system, my body, finally gets the permission to let it go. And I'm curious, have you ever created that space for yourself? That space of expression where you could just get it out and let it go. And that got me to thinking some more. So as I was thinking on those, as I was writing my Substack letter this morning, that got released this morning, it got me to thinking a little bit more seriously about what language really is. Because the truth is that we haven't always had words. Okay, words is something that we've learned and we've developed. When we come into this world, right, as babies, we don't know how to talk, but we do know how to communicate. Our physiology and our nervous system knows how to communicate. And so how do we do that? How do babies do that? Well, they cry, they giggle, they squirm, they root around when they're hungry or looking for comfort. Right? And for those who might not have babies, who might not have children, if you have animals, you know that your animals communicate all the time without words. Okay, I want you to think of that fur baby. That fur baby is always communicating in some way. You know, their tails wag. They get those whale eyes when they're getting worried or like on edge. Their ears can get pinned back. Their hair stands up on end. They start pacing or they're leaning in, or, you know, there's a lot of ways that even animals communicate and express themselves. And so as human beings, we can do this too. We can cross our arms. Okay. We cry, we laugh, we tense up, we go quiet, or we make eye contact or avoid it. When we sigh, we groan, sing loudly in the car. Maybe it's not singing at that point, but you know what I mean. And we scream. And all of this is expression. And expression is also a form of language. And so that's why I was saying, I think that for this one, it might be a subcategory of either that the visual or that somatic dialect. Because here's the thing is that expression matters. Because sometimes expression pushes the feeling through us in a way that words cannot. All right, so again, I want you to reflect in this moment. Reflect on those moments where you were able to finally just let something go through expression rather than talking it out. Because here's the thing, was what is happening inside of us is the body is trying to complete something that talking alone just sometimes just it cannot complete. Because this is where the nervous system comes in. One of the things that we know is that the nervous system holds on to stress. Okay, the nervous system is what makes our muscles tense. It's what restricts our breathing, gives us headaches, makes us feel fatigued, gives us insomnia, we become irritable, we got inflammation. Our bodies have all sorts of ways of telling us, clear as day, that we are carrying too much. We've hit overload. And when our emotions are repeatedly triggered or heightened without any kind of meaningful release, that tension, all those emotions, they just keep building. They just keep accumulating. So what happens then? Well, the question becomes, what kind of expression helps move that through? What does the body need in that moment? Sometimes it may be crying. Sometimes it may be singing very loudly. And sometimes it may be movement. And I'm talking movement in rage cleaning. Love rage cleaning. There's nothing better for me. Whenever I get angry, pop me in a room that needs to be clean. It'll be spotless by the time I'm done. Okay, because at the very least, then you can walk away feeling like you accomplished at least one thing while your emotions were all over the place. And sometimes, just maybe shaking it off. Or it could be screaming. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But here's the thing. I want to connect this to something that I think about often through the lens of Ayurveda. Ayurveda is what I study. And for those who don't know, Ayurveda is it's a approach, health and wellness approach. It's a 5,000-year-old system of medicine. It originated in India. And they have everything from just general practice to surgery, to psychological care, and everything that you can imagine. And so Ayurveda is the science of life. And so in Ayurveda, there's this idea that health depends on our ability to properly digest what we take in. And so when I say the word digest, a lot of people think only in terms of food, but it applies to everything we take in. It applies to the emotions, the experiences, and the stress and the things that happen around us on a day to day basis. And so proper digestion means that something comes in, it moves through the system, we take what we need from it, and then we expel the rest. And that same principle applies emotionally. We take in the experience, we feel what we feel, we process what matters, and then we allow the rest to move through and out. We don't let it get stuck in our body. And that's where expression comes in. That's why expression matters, because it's one of the ways that we complete the cycle. We complete it instead of holding on to it or interrupting it. Now, I want to take a moment and I'm going to tread carefully here, because this doesn't mean that every emotion should be unleashed, especially on other people, without thought or responsibility. Not saying that. There's a difference between releasing emotion and then directing it at someone or something. Okay, we don't want to get destructive. We're talking about creating a container of healing. And there is a difference between creating that healthy space for discharge and taking your frustration out, especially on another person or another thing, in a way that you're going to later regret. And that distinction matters, okay? That distinction matters a lot. And I say that because I come from background in specifically Maharshi Ayurveda. And one of the ideas often emphasizes speaking the sweet truth. And I understand the intention behind that, but I also understand the emphasis on speaking in ways that are useful, clear, and grounded rather than harmful. And I think that there's wisdom in not wanting to burn bridges or call people names or just kind of create unnecessary harm through reactive speech or expression. But I always was told that but negates what you say before. I don't know if I agree with that. Anyway, I also think that some people misunderstand those teachings and turn them into a form of emotional suppression. So they hear sweetness and they think that means they are never allowed to feel frustrated or angry or sad or just raw. They hear harmony and think that they have to keep everything pleasant at all times. And for me, that is a trap of toxic positivity, because the body is not always going to feel sweet. And just like with actual sweets, right? Eating too many sweets is not good for us, right? And so being overly sweet is also not good for us, because sometimes the body just feels angry. Damn it, we're heartbroken, we're overstimulated, and we're deeply frustrated. And suppressing those natural emotions does not make us more spiritual. I'm going to repeat that. Suppressing those natural emotions does not make us more spiritual. It makes us more disconnected from ourselves. It makes us more likely to store those feelings, right? That's the opposite of what we want to do. We're going to store those feelings, and then they're going to come out in another way entirely. Remember all those lists: insomnia, inflammation, tension. Yeah. Okay, so there's a nuance here. There's a nuance here. We do not want to weaponize our emotions against other people. But what we do need to create for ourselves is a space where those emotions can move and be released. We need to create a container where expression is safe, it's welcomed, and it's purposeful. The purpose being healing. And so that's actually one of the reasons I'm doing a Scream and Cuddle workshop this weekend. So March 21st. The point, it's not for chaos. It's not chaos for chaos' sake. The point is healing. The point of the whole workshop is to create a space, create that container where people can let out what's been sitting in their body, where screaming it's allowed, it's expected and useful, and where that release is followed by some softness and a little grounding, some reconnection, and we're gonna have a snack and cuddle pigs. Right? And that may sound funny, but honestly, I think that healing, honestly, it needs a little absurdity. Sometimes we need to be able just to laugh at the whole process, because it doesn't always have to be solemn. Sometimes it can be loud and messy and furry, kind. All right. And that brings me where I really want to land in this conversation, because this really does close out our theme around language. You know, the workshop here is kind of the culmination of that theme. But here's the thing, language, it doesn't stop. All right. So we're not going to necessarily stop talking about language, but language is just, it deepens. Because what we've learned is the foundation of words, of expression, of the dialects. And then from that foundation, what we can do is we can now recognize that the crying is language. Screaming is language. Okay? The rush of the wind in the car as we're driving and screaming out the lyrics to our favorite song, that's language. Expression is language. But there's a question that comes up in that. Can we start noticing when those signals are building before we need an intervention? Can we begin to notice the body a little earlier? Can we start to feel and notice that tension or the restlessness? What about the urge to cry? Or the urge to clean? And do it before we've reached the end of our rope. Knowing and being able to say, I'm angry right now, or I'm sad right now, or I'm happy I aced that I aced that interview, I aced that test, or whatever it is. But noticing those moments. The reason I ask is because that noticing is awareness, and that's where we're headed next. So as we move into the next phase of this work, I want you to stay curious about your own expressions. We don't have to talk about it necessarily, but I would love for you to leave a comment if you want. I'd love for you to start a conversation here in the comment section. That would be great. Okay, but you don't have to just use your words. You can also use your sounds. Okay, your movements, urges, and your own rhythms, your own expressions. What language does is, for your body, it allows it to speak. And especially when words themselves just stop working, we can rely on the language of expression. And so I want to ask you, what language does your body speak when words stop working? And how might you begin honoring that language instead of suppressing it, especially for those who suppress it? I know you and I see you because I am you. And here's where I want to bring up the root method before we close out today. All right, so before we wrap it all up, I want to bring in the root method one more time because it still applies here. Reflect on what your body has been trying to tell you and open yourself up to the full range of possibilities for how you can express it and release what you're holding, digest those feelings. And then we're going to step back and organize those possibilities according to what's realistic and safe, and creating a healing container. That's important. This work only works if we're creating a container of healing for ourselves in these moments. And then once we reflect and open and organize, and we tell. And that's where you tell in the comments. Tell the truth about what expression looks like for you. Tell me what helps and what you've been learning. Because sometimes language is a sentence, but then also language is a scream. So if you are in the, it's the Batesburg-Leesville area, but if you are in the kind of surrounding area of Batesburg-Leesville in South Carolina, I want to invite you for a scream this weekend. Tickets are on sale. You can check out my website and the ticket site will pop right up. And so you can definitely check that out. I would love to see you there. And if not, I am looking at ways of figuring out how I might be able to kind of maybe create the same space online. I'm looking at starting some online workshops as well for those who are interested. So as always, I want you to just engage. I want you to hit all the buttons. I want you to like it and share it, repost it, push it out to all your friends. But I want to thank you for joining me here in the Wild and the Wise classroom. And I'm really enjoying creating this space and figuring out, curating this space. Because it's done a lot for me. It's helping me to develop myself and my professional presence as a teacher, but it's also helping me to reach out in different ways instead of hiding behind the words. And now I get to see you face to face and you get to see me and see I'm a real person in a real environment. And one of these days I'll get this actually maybe looking a little better. But thank you all so much. As always, leave me a like, leave me a comment, leave me a share. If you're not following, please hit that subscribe button, hit that share, hit that follow button. To keep updated on everything that I have got going on, because I have got everything going on. But it's been wonderful connecting with you, and I will see you next week with our new blog and Substack letter that is going to start to introduce you to the world of awareness.